German officers believed Tiger tanks could hold, until American Pershings turned them into scrap. February the 26th, 1945, 14:30 hours. Elsdorf, Germany. Hauptmann Klaus Müller stood in the commander's cupola of his Tiger I, scanning the frozen wheat fields through Zeiss optics that cost more than a farmhouse. The metal was cold enough to pull skin off bare fingers. 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the east carrying the smell of burning coal and distant artillery. "They're sending their Shermans again," he told his gunner, almost laughing. "Worthless tin coffins." Müller had destroyed 11 Allied tanks in 3 months. His Tiger's 88mm gun could punch through a Sherman's front armor at 2,000 meters. The Americans could only penetrate his frontal plate at 300 meters, if they got lucky. The math was simple. Brutal. German. His gunner, Werner, didn't share the confidence. The scouts reported something different this morning. New silhouettes. "New Shermans are still Shermans," Müller said, pulling his gloves tighter. "The Führer's engineers gave us invincibility. Let them come." The radio crackled. American columns approaching from the northwest. Distance 4 kilometers and closing. Müller had read the intelligence reports. American tank production, 50,000 Shermans. German Tiger production, barely 1,400. But numbers meant nothing when one Tiger could eliminate 5, 6, 7 enemy tanks before taking a scratch. The Americans were drowning them in cheap metal, but cheap metal burned all the same. He'd been at Normandy, watched Shermans brew up. That's what the British called it when a tank's ammunition cooked off. One after another, like Roman candles on New Year's Eve. Their crews didn't even have time to scream. "Load armor-piercing," he ordered. The loader slammed an 88mm round home. The breech closed with that satisfying mechanical click that meant German precision. That meant survival. What Hauptmann Müller didn't know was that rolling toward him, hidden in the snow-dusted tree lines and ruined villages, was a machine his intelligence officers had dismissed as developmental and not yet combat-ready. A tank that matched his Tiger's frontal armor. A tank whose gun could penetrate his precious Krupp steel at 1,500 meters. The Americans called it the M26 Pershing. And Klaus Müller had 90 minutes left to live. Rewind 6 weeks. January 15th, 1945. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. 0800 hours. Technical Sergeant Raymond Flores stood in 3 inches of Maryland slush, watching a tank that looked wrong. Too long. Too low. Too late. "They want us to take that to Europe," said Private Jimmy Kowalski, his loader, 20 years old. Pittsburgh steel mill kid. Hands that could load a 90mm round in 4 seconds flat. The M26 Pershing wasn't supposed to exist yet. The brass had spent 3 years arguing about it while the Shermans burned. Too heavy, they said. Too complex. Too expensive. The Sherman was good enough. Good enough. That phrase killed more American tank crews than German 88s. Flores had commanded a Sherman at Mortain, watched his best friend's tank take a Tiger round through the turret face. The shell went in the front, came out the back, and took Tommy Henderson's head with it. The rest of the crew drowned in burning hydraulic fluid before they could bail out. Good enough was written on Tommy's death certificate, though the official cause read combat casualties. The Pershing smelled like fresh paint and cosmoline. 90mm gun, longer than a telephone pole. Frontal armor, 4 inches at 46 degrees. Same effective thickness as a Tiger. The engineers had finally built something that could trade punches. But finally meant February 1945. The war had been going for 6 years. American tankers had been dying in Shermans for 2.5 years. The Pershing was the apology that showed up to the funeral. "Sergeant Flores!" Lieutenant Harmon approached, boots splashing. "Young officer, West Point. Still believed in the textbooks. Your crew's been selected for emergency deployment. You ship to Antwerp in 72 hours. "Ship to what?" Kowalski said. "Sir, we haven't even test-fired the main gun yet." "You'll test-fire it in Germany." The plan was insane. 20 Pershings. That's all they had ready. 20 tanks to prove a concept the Army had spent 3 years claiming they didn't need. Someone in Washington had finally done the math. Tigers were eliminating Shermans at a 6-to-1 ratio. The Allies were winning because they could afford to lose 6 tanks. The crews inside those 6 tanks had different opinions about the strategy. Flores ran his hand along the Pershing's hull. Cold steel, but not the thin kind. This was 3 inches of homogeneous armor that didn't buckle or spall when hit. The welding seams were clean. American industrial power finally pointed in the right direction. "What's the combat doctrine for this thing?" he asked Harmon. "We're developing that in the field." Translation? Nobody knew. The Pershing was too new. No manual, no tactics, no doctrine. Just raw capability and a prayer. They spent the next 70 hours learning the tank. The engine was a 4GA FV8, barely adequate for 46 tons. Top speed on roads, 25 miles per hour. A Tiger could hit 23. The Pershing wasn't faster. It wasn't more reliable. It just wouldn't die in the first exchange. The gunner, Corporal Eddie Chen, first-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco, took apart the 90mm fire control system and put it back together in 6 hours. "Optics are clean," he said. "Rangefinders calibrated. This gun can reach out and touch somebody." "How far?" Flores asked. Chen did the math on a notepad. "Penetration tables say we can crack Tiger frontal armor at 1,200 meters, maybe 1,500 if we're lucky. And they can crack us at about the same, maybe less if they're shooting that tungsten core MMO we keep hearing about." So, this was progress. A fair fight. American tankers had been begging for a fair fight since North Africa. The problem was that fair fights get people buried. American doctrine relied on overwhelming numbers, artillery support, air superiority. One-on-one duels were German tactics. The Pershings were being sent to play a game by German rules, and nobody had told them how it would end. February 10th, they loaded onto a Liberty ship in Boston. 12 Pershings per ship, wrapped in waterproof tarps, chained to the deck. The Atlantic crossing took 8 days through U-boat waters. Flores slept on a bunk that smelled like diesel and somebody else's sweat, listening to the hull creak, wondering if a torpedo would find them before they ever saw combat. Kowalski spent the voyage carving a wooden cross. "For luck," he said. "You're not religious," Flores said. "I am now." They landed at Antwerp on February 18th. The docks were chaos. Men, machines, supplies, stacked 3 stories high. The war was eating material faster than the factories could produce it. Somewhere in that logistics nightmare, 20 experimental tanks and their green crews were supposed to make a difference. The Pershings rolled off the ships with fresh paint and virgin tracks. They looked like parade ground machines, pretty, unscarred. The men who saw them, infantry veterans with mud on their boots and death in their eyes, laughed. "Fresh meat," one sergeant said, watching Flores's crew roll past. "Give 'em a week." Flores wanted to argue, wanted to explain the armor thickness, the gun penetration, the engineering miracle they were sitting in. But the sergeant was already walking away, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Nobody believed in wonder weapons anymore. Not after the Germans had rolled out Tigers, Panthers, King Tigers, each one deadlier than the last. each one ultimately overwhelmed by American numbers and logistics. The Pershing looked like another desperate gamble. February the 25th, they reached the front lines near Cologne. The city was a corpse, 90% destroyed by bombing. Civilians moved through the rubble like ghosts. The smell was unforgettable. Burnt wood, burst sewage, bodies under collapsed buildings that nobody had time to recover. The 3rd Armored Division commander, Major General Maurice Rose, inspected the Pershings personally. He walked the line of tanks, touching armor, peering into hatches. Veteran tanker. North Africa, Sicily, France. He'd seen Shermans burn. "Gentlemen," he told the assembled crews, "you're carrying the future of American armor. Don't waste it." Then he said something that made Flores's stomach drop. "Intelligence reports Tiger and Panther concentrations around Elsdorf. They're dug in. We're going through them tomorrow." Tomorrow was February the 26th. Flores spent that night checking and rechecking every system. Ammunition, 40 rounds of 90 millimeters. Mix of armor-piercing and high explosive. Fuel, full tanks plus 2 external jerry cans. Engine, tuned and purring. Radio, clear comms with command. Kowalski couldn't sleep. He sat on the turret, staring east where the German lines glowed with distant fires. "You scared?" Flores asked. "Terrified. You?" "Same." They were about to test whether American industry had finally caught up to German engineering, whether 4 years of dead friends in burning Shermans had taught the brass anything, whether the Pershing was a solution or just another well-armored coffin. 32 hours from now, the world would know. February the 26th, 1945, 0600 hours. Forward assembly area, west of Elsdorf. The Pershings idled in a forest clearing, exhaust mixing with morning fog. Temperature, 28 degrees. The crews ate cold rations, hash and crackers that tasted like cardboard and regret. Lieutenant Harmon gathered the tank commanders, 6 Pershings for the initial thrust, the rest in reserve. Aerial reconnaissance confirms 4 Tigers and 6 Panthers in defensive positions along the approach roads. They've got perfect fields of fire, open ground for 800 meters before we reach cover. Open ground, the killing zone, where Sherman after Sherman had died trying to cross similar terrain. "Our advantage," Harmon continued, "is that they don't know what we are. Intelligence reports German recognition manuals don't include the M26. They'll think we're Shermans until we get close." Eddie Chen raised his hand. "So we get close and trade shots with Tigers?" "Exactly." "Sir, that's suicide." "No," Harmon said, and for the first time Flores saw real steel in the young officer's eyes. "That's a fair fight, which is more than our guys have had for 2 years." The plan was simple, because complex plans die when the first shot is fired. Advance in 2 columns. Use the Pershings as breakthrough tanks, the role the Sherman had never been designed for. Let the 90mm gun do the talking. What the Germans didn't know, what nobody fully understood yet, was that the Pershing wasn't just a better Sherman. It was a fundamental shift in American armored philosophy. The Sherman was designed to exploit breakthroughs, not create them. Fast, reliable, good enough against German medium tanks. But good enough meant nothing against Tigers and Panthers. The American solution had been to swarm, send 5 Shermans against 1 Tiger, accept 3 losses and call it victory. The Pershing ended that calculus. Same frontal armor as a Tiger, same gun penetration, but with American industrial advantages. Better optics, faster turret traverse, more reliable ammunition. The Germans had been fighting qualitative superiority for 3 years. Now the Americans had matched them. But matching isn't beating. And the Germans had been fighting tank versus tank warfare since Poland. They knew every trick. 0730 hours. Engines roared to life. The Pershings rolled out in formation, tracks chewing frozen mud. Flores sat in the commander's position, head out of the hatch, feeling the wind cut through his wool jacket. The countryside looked peaceful. Snow-dusted fields, bare trees, church steeples in the distance. Somewhere out there, Klaus Müller was waiting. The radio crackled. Fireball leader, this is Fireball 6. Advance at speed. Execute Plan Charlie. Plan Charlie. Aggressive advance. No reconnaissance. Hit them before they know what you are. The Pershings accelerated to 20 miles per hour. Fast for 46 tons. Not fast enough to dodge shells. Kowalski's voice came through the intercom. Movement. 11 o'clock. Tree line. Eddie Chen swiveled the turret. Can't identify. Too far. They crossed the first kilometer without contact. The tension was suffocating. Every shadow could be a hidden AT gun. Every building could conceal a Panzerfaust team. 8-12 hours. The radio exploded with traffic. Contact! Tiger tank, direct front, 1,000 meters. I see him. 2 o'clock. Hull down. Panther moving in the village. Mark! The world erupted. A Tiger round screamed past Flores's Pershing, missing by 10 feet. The crack of the 88mm was unmistakable, a sound every Allied tanker knew from nightmares. But the round missed because the Tiger gunner had aimed for a Sherman. The Tiger's optics showed a standard M4 silhouette. By the time the German crew realized their mistake, Eddie Chen had the Tiger in his sights. Gunner, target tank, armor-piercing. Identified. Fire! The 90mm gun spoke for the first time in combat. The recoil rocked the Pershing. The round flew at 2,800 feet per second, crossing 1,000 meters in barely a second. Hit. The Tiger's frontal armor, previously impervious to every American tank gun, buckled. The round punched through, detonating inside the crew compartment. Secondary explosions rippled through the Tiger's ammunition stowage. The entire tank convulsed, turret lifting 6 inches before crashing back down. Target destroyed! Chen screamed. The radio went insane. Holy, did you see that? Fireball 3 just knocked out a Tiger. 1 shot. What the hell are we shooting? The German crews were panicking. Their intelligence had said the Americans only had Shermans. Shermans required close range to threaten a Tiger. But these unknown American tanks were penetrating heavy armor at ranges that shouldn't be possible. Klaus Müller, 300 meters to the north, watched his wingman's Tiger burn. His mind raced through the recognition manuals. Long hull, low profile. That gun, 90mm at least. This wasn't in the briefings. All units, engage at maximum range, he barked into the radio. These are not standard Shermans. Too late. The Americans had already closed to 800 meters. Flores's Pershing pushed through a ruined barn, turret traversing. Another target, Panther tank, hull down behind rubble. The Panther's 75mm gun flashed. The round hit Flores's frontal armor with the sound of a cathedral bell being struck by a sledgehammer. The impact threw everyone against their restraints. But the armor held. The German shells shattered against American steel, fragments spraying harmlessly. "We're still alive," Kowalski shouted, disbelieving. Chen already had the return shot lined up. On the way! The Panther's turret face caved in. Catastrophic elimination. The German crew never knew what hit them. This was the hidden advantage. Not just equivalent armor and guns. That made it a fair fight. The advantage was psychological. German tank doctrine relied on qualitative superiority. Their crews were trained to believe they had the best tanks, the best guns, the best armor. That confidence let them take aggressive positions to hold ground against superior numbers. The Tiger was invincibility wrapped in Krupp steel. The Pershing shattered that confidence in minutes. By 0900 hours, the German defensive line was collapsing. 4 Tigers eliminated, 3 Panthers burning. The surviving German armor was retreating, something Tigers almost never did. But the battle wasn't over. Hauptmann Müller's Tiger was still operational. He'd pulled back to a secondary position, hull down behind a stone farmhouse. The Americans would have to come through a choke point to reach the road to Cologne. And Müller still had 14 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition. He watched through his optics as 3 Pershings advanced. The lead tank was commanded by Sergeant Flores. "Patience," Müller told his gunner. "Let them commit. Then we strike." The Tiger's 88mm was loaded with PZ Gar-40, tungsten core armor-piercing. Rare ammunition, expensive, but capable of penetrating even these new American tanks at the right angle. 600 meters, 500, 400. Fire! The round caught Flores's Pershing on the upper glacis, where the armor was thickest. The tungsten penetrator hit at an oblique angle, ricocheted, and screamed off into a field. But the impact cracked the driver's periscope and sent a shower of spalling fragments into the crew compartment. "Driver wounded!" Flores shouted, blood on his face from a fragment cut. The Pershing slewed to a stop, combat ineffective. Müller smiled. 1 down. He began to reload. What he didn't see was Lieutenant Harmon's Pershing, 200 meters to the right, concealed behind a destroyed truck. Harmon had watched Müller's muzzle flash. Now he had a firing solution. "Gunner, target tank, flank shot." "Identified." "Fire!" The 90mm round hit the Tiger's side armor at 90 degrees. No angle to deflect. No thickness to absorb. The shell penetrated, crossed the entire crew compartment, killed everyone inside, and exited through the opposite side. Klaus Müller died instantly, never knowing he'd been flanked. His last thought was confusion. How had the Americans gotten so good? February the 26th, 1945, 1400 hours, Elsdorf town center. The Pershings rolled through burning streets, past German soldiers with their hands up, past civilians peering from cellars. The 3rd Armored Division had broken through, but the cost was visible. Flores's Pershing had a cracked glacis and a wounded driver. 2 other Pershings had taken hits, not penetrations, but damage. The crews were learning what German tankers already knew. Heavy armor warfare was brutal, even when you won. The victory at Elsdorf rippled through both armies like electricity. At 3rd Armored Headquarters, intelligence officers scrambled to document what happened. 6 Pershings versus 4 Tigers and 6 Panthers. Results: German armor eliminated with 3 American tanks damaged, 0 destroyed. Loss ratio, 0. Compare that to Sherman performance. Average loss ratio against Tigers was 5-1, sometimes worse. General Rose ordered immediate dispersal of all Pershings to critical sectors. "I want these tanks where the Germans are strongest," he said. "Let them see what American industry can build when we stop cutting corners." The word spread through the American lines faster than radio. Tankers, who'd been saying prayers before every patrol, suddenly had something else: hope. "They built us a real tank," one Sherman commander told his crew, watching a Pershing roll past. They finally built us a real tank." But the Germans were learning too. February the 27th, 1945. Wehrmacht High Command, Berlin. Oberst Heinrich Kramer reviewed the field reports with growing alarm. American tanks matching Tiger performance. Frontal armor penetrated at extended range. Loss ratios collapsing. "How many of these new tanks?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. Estimated 20 to 50. "Only 20? Kramer almost laughed. 20 tanks against the entire Wehrmacht. But 20 could become 200. 2,000. American production capacity was terrifying. 50,000 Shermans in 3 years if they retooled for this new design. "Issue immediate recognition updates," he ordered. "All units must be advised. These are not Shermans. They must be engaged with extreme caution." But extreme caution wasn't an option anymore. The German army was collapsing. Fuel shortages crippled armor movement. Ammunition was rationed. Experienced crews were dead or captured. The Tigers and Panthers that remained were irreplaceable. The Pershing had arrived at the perfect moment, not when the German army was strongest, but when it was already breaking. The tank didn't have to single-handedly win the war. It just had to accelerate the inevitable. March 2nd, 1945. Cologne outskirts. Sergeant Flores's crew had a new driver, Private Marcus Webb, transferred from a Sherman unit. Webb was terrified. His previous tank had been destroyed at the Bulge. He'd bailed out with burns on both hands while his commander died in the fire. "This tank won't burn like that," Flores told him. "Ammunition stored in the hull, wet stowage system. If we get hit, we're getting out." Webb didn't look convinced. He'd heard promises before. The Pershings were assigned to spearhead the assault into Cologne, Germany's fourth largest city. Intelligence estimated 200 German tanks in defensive positions. Tigers, Panthers, even some King Tigers. The monstrous 70-ton behemoths with 88mm guns that could eliminate any Allied tank at 2,000 meters. The Americans had 20 Pershings and 300 Shermans. The math still favored mass over quality. But the math had changed. March 3rd, 0800 hours. The assault began with an artillery barrage that made the earth shake. 200 guns pulverizing German positions. Then, the armor rolled forward. Shermans and Pershings mixed. Infantry clinging to hulls. Air support overhead. The Germans fought like cornered animals. Panzerfaust teams in every building. 88mm AT guns in rubble piles. Tiger tanks firing from concealed positions, then retreating before counter-battery fire could find them. Flores's Pershing took 3 hits in the first hour. All bounced. The frontal armor did its job. Absorbed kinetic energy, deflected shells, kept the crew alive. After each impact, Kowalski would scream something incomprehensible. Chen would acquire a new target, and they'd return fire. By noon, they'd eliminated 2 Panthers and 1 Tiger. By 1400 hours, the Pershing's gun barrel was so hot it glowed. 43 rounds fired, 38 hits, 11 confirmed eliminations. Eddie Chen's hands were blistering from the recoil guards. Kowalski's shoulder was bruised from loading rounds. Flores's voice was raw from shouting commands. But they were alive. Their tank was functional. They were winning. At 1530 hours, they encountered the King Tiger. It was hull down behind a collapsed apartment building, only the turret visible. The monster tank was 80 meters away, point-blank range for tank combat. The King Tiger fired first. The round hit Flores's turret mantle, the thickest armor on the Pershing, 6 inches of cast steel. The tungsten penetrator punched through, but barely. The shell entered the turret, grazed the 90mm breech, killed the radio, and embedded itself in the turret basket without detonating. If it had been 2 inches to the left, it would have hit the ammunition. Everyone would have died. Chen didn't hesitate. The 90mm was already aimed at the King Tiger's turret face. Firing! The range was so close that the shell hit before the recoil even rocked the Pershing. The King Tiger's turret face, 9 inches of armor, cracked. The round didn't fully penetrate, but it cracked. And that crack was enough. The King Tiger's crew bailed out immediately. They knew what came next. Follow-up shots, artillery, bazooka teams. The tank was disabled, mission killed. They ran. Flores's crew sat in stunned silence. They'd survived an engagement with a King Tiger. The Sherman crews they'd trained with wouldn't have believed it was possible. "Loader," Flores said, his voice shaking. "Status on ammunition?" 8 rounds remaining. Mix of AP and HE. 8 rounds. They'd started the day with 40. "Gunner, any targets?" "Negative. Area looks clear." Flores climbed out of the turret into cold air that tasted like cordite and burning rubber. Cologne was a vision of hell. Fires everywhere, walls collapsing, civilians and soldiers moving through smoke like shadows. And in the middle of that chaos, a 20-strong unit of American tanks had held their own against the best Germany could field. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it. That evening, General Rose visited the Pershing crews personally. He shook hands, inspected damage, asked about mechanical reliability. He understood what these 20 tanks represented, not just a new weapon, but validation of a philosophy. American armor didn't have to be disposable. American crews didn't have to accept 6-to-1 loss ratios as acceptable casualties. When the engineers were given time and resources, they could match anyone. "You're writing history," Rose told Flores. "The Ordnance Department back home is watching every report. This is proof that heavy armor works." Flores thought about Tommy Henderson, about the Sherman crews who died in tanks that couldn't fight back, about the 2 years wasted building good enough when actually good had been possible all along. "General," he said, "with respect, we shouldn't have needed proof. The Germans showed us what worked in 1942. We could have built this tank 3 years ago." Rose nodded. "You're right. We could have." But the war was nearly over, and recriminations would have to wait. The Pershings had proven themselves. Now they just had to survive until the end. March 6th, the Pershings crossed the Rhine, the last great natural barrier protecting Germany's heartland. They encountered sporadic resistance, ambushes, desperate last stands, but no more Tigers. German armor was extinct. By March 20th, the 3rd Armored Division was deep in German territory. The Pershings had logged 300 combat hours, 62 confirmed tank eliminations, 0 Pershings destroyed, though 7 were damaged and under repair. The German officers who'd believed Tigers were invincible had been proven catastrophically wrong. Some were dead, some were prisoners. The rest were retreating toward Berlin, trying to make sense of how the Americans had caught up so fast. The answer was simple. They hadn't caught up fast. They'd caught up late. Desperately late. But just barely in time. March 30th, 1945. Paderborn, Germany. General Maurice Rose stood in the commander's cupola of his command vehicle, directing traffic at a critical intersection. The division was spread across 20 kilometers, too thin, moving too fast, chasing a disintegrating enemy. A column of vehicles approached. Rose assumed they were American stragglers. He waved them forward. They were German tanks. At 50 meters, a Panther identified Rose's rank insignia. The German commander made a split-second decision. Eliminate the American general. 1 shot. Point-blank range. Maurice Rose died instantly. The man who'd championed the Pershing, who'd seen its potential before anyone else, was eliminated by the very enemy the Pershing was designed to defeat. The irony was vicious. Rose had spent 2 years begging for a tank that could protect his men. When it finally arrived, it protected everyone except him. The news devastated the 3rd Armored Division. Flores heard about it over the radio and sat in silence for an hour. Kowalski found him staring at nothing. "We're going to end this," Flores finally said. "For him, for Tommy, for everyone in a Sherman who didn't make it." The Pershings pushed harder. No mercy, no hesitation. They became executioners, systematically eliminating every piece of German armor they encountered. April 11th, the 3rd Armored reached the Elbe River, less than 90 miles from Berlin. The Pershings had been in combat for 45 days straight. Every tank was scarred, tracks worn to bare metal, paint stripped by heat, and shrapnel. Crews operating on adrenaline, and coffee, and rage. But they'd held. Not one Pershing had been completely destroyed in combat. Damaged, yes. Disabled temporarily. But no catastrophic eliminations. No crews burned alive. Compare that to the Shermans. The 3rd Armored had lost 144 Sherman tanks in the same period. Most crews survived. American doctrine emphasized escape hatches and crew survival. But the mental toll of abandoning tank after tank, of watching your vehicle burn while you ran, was immeasurable. The Pershing gave crews something they'd never had: confidence. The belief that if they did everything right, they wouldn't just survive, they'd win. Captured German tankers told interrogators the same story over and over. The new American tanks were terrifying, not because they were invincible. Nothing is invincible. But because they were unexpected. One Tiger commander, Lieutenant Hans Becker, captured near Paderborn. "We trained to fight Shermans. Close the distance, shoot first, eliminate them before they could flank. Then these new tanks appear. Same frontal protection as our Tigers. Better optics. Faster turret traverse. We couldn't adapt fast enough." An SS Panther commander, name redacted. The worst part was the psychology. For 3 years we knew we had better tanks. That knowledge kept us fighting, even when everything else was falling apart. When the Americans matched us, the last advantage was gone. That was the hidden impact. The Pershing didn't just destroy German tanks, it destroyed German morale. It proved that American industry could build quality, not just quantity. That the technological edge Germany had relied on was temporary. The British noticed, too. Churchill requested a full briefing on Pershing performance. The British had their own heavy tank programs, Centurion, Conqueror, but they were even further behind schedule. The Americans had beaten them to fielding a modern heavy tank, and it showed. May 8, 1945, VE Day. Victory in Europe. Flores's Pershing crew celebrated in a small German town whose name nobody remembered. They'd survived. Against all odds, through 45 days of continuous combat, they'd survived. The Pershing's hull was decorated with tally marks, one for each confirmed elimination. 23 marks. 23 German tanks that would never threaten another Sherman. Kowalski had added something else. 23 small crosses underneath the tally marks. For the German crews, he explained when Flores asked. They were just doing their job too. Flores didn't argue. The war was over. The killing was done. Revenge felt hollow now. Eddie Chen climbed onto the turret with a bottle of champagne they'd liberated from a Wehrmacht supply depot. "To Tommy Henderson," he said, "and everyone who didn't make it." They drank in silence. The official reports were already being written. The Pershing had proven itself in combat. Recommendations for full-scale production, proposals for an improved model, better engine, thicker armor, longer gun. The M26 would become the M46, then the M47, then the foundation for every American main battle tank for the next 40 years. But those were future problems. Right now, in May 1945, the Pershing was vindication. Vindication for every tanker who died in an under-armored Sherman. Vindication for the engineers who'd been told their designs were too expensive. Vindication for the theory that American industrial capacity could build quality and quantity simultaneously. The war had been won with Shermans, 50,000 reliable, mass-produced, good-enough tanks that overwhelmed German defenses through sheer numbers and logistics. The Pershing hadn't won the war, but it had proven that the war could have been won with fewer American deaths if the decision-makers had listened sooner. June 1945. Sergeant Raymond Flores received orders to return stateside. The Pershing would be shipped back for evaluation and study. The crew would be split up, some staying in occupation duty, others rotating home. On his last day in Germany, Flores visited an American military cemetery. Row after row of white crosses, thousands of them. Many were tankers, Sherman crews who'd done their duty in machines that couldn't protect them. He found a grave marked C.P.L. Thomas Henderson, 3rd Armored Division, 1920 to 1944. Flores knelt. "We got a better tank, Tommy. Took them long enough, but we got one. You would have loved it. Armor that actually stops rounds. A gun that reaches out and touches people. Everything we needed 2 years ago." The crosses stood silent. The dead didn't care about vindication, but the living did. Every tanker who climbed into a Pershing after 1945 did so knowing they had a fighting chance. Not because of luck, or numbers, or suicidal bravery, but because someone finally built them the right tool for the job. The Pershing wasn't a wonder weapon. It wasn't revolutionary. It was just a tank that matched contemporary threats with contemporary solutions. That was the tragedy. It should have been obvious all along. July 1950. Pusan Perimeter, South Korea. The M26 Pershing rumbled off a transport ship into a new war. 5 years after proving itself in Germany, the tank was facing a different enemy. North Korean T-34/85s supported by Soviet doctrine. The T-34 was a good tank, excellent even, but it was 1950, and the T-34 was designed in 1940. The Pershing was designed in 1944 and refined through 1949. The technological gap was decisive. In the first month of the Korean War, Pershing-equipped units destroyed 37 North Korean tanks without losing a single M26 to enemy fire. The loss ratio that had been revolutionary in Germany, 0 American tanks destroyed, became standard doctrine in Korea. Young tankers who'd never heard of Klaus Müller or Raymond Flores climbed into Pershings and dominated the battlefield. They thought the tank was normal, expected. Of course, American armor could match any threat. That's how it always was, right? They didn't know the 2-year delay that cost thousands of lives. Didn't know about the Sherman crews who'd begged for better protection. Didn't know that the tank they took for granted was a hard-won lesson written in blood. By 1951, the Pershing evolved into the M46 Patton. Better engine, 810 horsepower instead of 500. Improved transmission, longer operational range. The lessons from those 45 days in Germany had been systematized, institutionalized, built into doctrine. The American military learned. Heavy armor wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Tank versus tank warfare required qualitative parity at minimum. Good enough was a death sentence. But institutions forget. By Vietnam, the U.S. was deploying light armor and helicopters, convinced that heavy tanks were obsolete. The M48 Patton, descendant of the Pershing, was used primarily for infantry support. not tank duels. The lessons of 1945 had to be relearned in the rice paddies and jungles. Then came the 1980s. The Soviet Union fielded the T-72, a genuine threat to American armor. The response was the M1 Abrams, composite armor, 120mm smoothbore gun, turbine engine, a monster. The Abrams wasn't just descended from the Pershing, it was the Pershing's philosophy perfected. Match any threat. Protect the crew. Use American industrial and technological advantages to build qualitative parity, then overwhelm with quantity. Operation Desert Storm, 1991. M1 Abrams tanks faced Iraqi T-72s in the largest armor battle since World War II. The results were catastrophic for the Iraqis. American tanks eliminated Iraqi armor at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. Iraqi tanks couldn't penetrate Abrams' frontal armor even at point-blank range. Loss ratio, 0. 0 Abrams destroyed by enemy tanks in direct combat. The ghost of the Pershing haunted that battlefield. The philosophy validated in 1945 that American armor could and should be the best in the world had become reality. Raymond Flores watched Desert Storm on television from his home in New Mexico. He was 72 years old, retired. Grandchildren who couldn't imagine a war where American tanks burned. He saw the Abrams footage and recognized the lineage immediately. Same frontal armor emphasis, same long-range gunnery, same confidence in crew protection over speed or mass production. "That's what we needed," he told his grandson. "That's what we asked for in 1943. Took them 50 years, but they finally got it right." His grandson didn't understand. To him, American tank superiority was natural, obvious. How could it be any other way? Flores didn't explain. Some lessons can't be taught, only learned through experience. The Pershing was that experience, condensed into 46 tons of steel and validation. Eddie Chen died in 1987, Kowalski in 1992, Flores in 2003. The last of the Pershing crews slowly disappeared, taking their memories with them. But the tanks remained, museum pieces now, carefully restored, displayed with plaques explaining their significance. Visitors walk past without understanding. It's just an old tank, boxy, primitive, not like modern armor. They don't see what Flores saw. Proof that American lives matter. That good enough isn't acceptable when better is possible. That industrial capacity means nothing without the will to use it properly. The Pershing arrived too late to save Tommy Henderson. Too late for the crews who died at Normandy, at the Bulge, at Mortain. Too late for Maurice Rose. But it arrived in time to prove a point. When American industry focuses on quality instead of cutting corners, the results are world-class. That lesson echoes through every tank design since. Every emphasis on crew survivability. Every requirement that American armor should match or exceed any potential threat. Every decision that a soldier's life is worth the extra cost of proper equipment. Klaus Müller was wrong. The Tiger wasn't invincible. German engineering wasn't insurmountable, right? American industrial capacity, when properly directed, could build excellence and still mass-produce it. The Pershing turned German Tigers into scrap, but more importantly, it turned good enough into a relic of the past, into a mistake that would never, should never, be repeated. 65 years after Elsdorf, the M1 Abrams still uses the basic philosophy the Pershing proved: frontal protection, long-range gunnery, crew survivability over all else. The American military still designs armor around that 1945 revelation that proper equipment saves lives. The Pershing's legacy isn't the 23 tanks it destroyed. It's the thousands of American tankers who came after Flores and Chen and Kowalski, who climbed into properly designed armor and came home alive because someone finally learned the lesson. That legacy, written in 45 days of combat, echoes every time an American tank rolls into battle and brings its crew home safe. The Germans believed Tigers could hold. The Pershings proved them wrong. And American armor never forgot.